My name is Nadia Kessler. I'm 33, and I'm a certified digital forensics examiner, which means I've spent the last 9 years learning to read the one thing most people forget every document actually carries: a hidden trail of timestamps, software versions, and system metadata that reveals exactly when a file was really created, no matter what date sits printed at the top of the page. So when my stepmother invited me to a small family celebration for my late father's company, I already knew exactly which forensic tool I was going to open on my laptop before I agreed to a single thing. What I didn't know yet was that I'd be standing backstage at a NASDAQ launch ceremony in front of 300 investors and a live press feed when I found out precisely what that trail actually showed. Welcome back to her final chapter, where every story starts with silence and ends with power. If you've ever had your expertise dismissed by the people who needed it kept quiet the most, this one's for you. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. My father, Julian Kessler, built Vantage Secure from a two-person consulting operation in our garage into a 200-employee cybersecurity software company over 18 years, the kind of quiet, methodical growth that never made headlines until it did. I grew up watching him debug code at the kitchen table, teaching me, almost by accident, how systems remember things users never intend them to remember. A lesson that would eventually become my entire career, though neither of us understood that yet when I was 12. I became a certified digital forensics examiner at 26, after a rigorous certification process focused on metadata analysis, document authentication, and the specific technical standards that allow forensic findings to hold up in federal court. I now serve as an expert witness in roughly a dozen cases a year, work that requires exactly the kind of patient, unglamorous technical scrutiny most people never realize exists behind a simple electronic signature on a document. My quirk, if you want to call it that, is that I still keep a small external hard drive in my bag on every professional engagement, loaded with the same forensic imaging software I used on my very first case, even though I now run everything through far more sophisticated cloud-based tools, a habit from my first mentor, who taught me never to trust a single analysis method when a second independent one could confirm or contradict it. My colleagues tease me about it constantly. It's the same habit that would end up mattering more than any of us understood the week my stepmother called about the IPO launch. What most people don't understand about my work is how much of it comes down to something my father actually taught me, without meaning to train a forensic examiner. Every digital document leaves a trail: creation timestamps, software version signatures, edit histories, that exists independently of whatever date someone chooses to type into the visible text. A printed date can lie. The metadata underneath it almost never can, not without leaving its own separate evidence of the tampering. The call came on a Thursday evening in September, my stepmother Renata's voice carrying the particular warmth she reserves for moments already decided before I've said a word. Nadia, we're finally taking Vantage Secure public. The IPO launch is next month at the NASDAQ Tower, and we're framing it as a celebration of your father's legacy. We'd love for you to be there, and honestly, it would mean so much to have family unity visible to investors. I asked what family unity specifically involved. Renata hesitated, then said brightly, "There's a small trust amendment finalizing board structure ahead of the offering. It's just paperwork, Nadia. Your father wanted a clean transition before he passed, and Colton's been managing the company brilliantly. We just need everyone visibly aligned for the roadshow. It's just paperwork." She'd used some version of that phrase for a decade, ever since I'd asked, at 24, for help covering the remaining cost of my forensic certification. My father, at the time still fully in charge of the company, had actually offered to help immediately. It was Renata, managing the family's discretionary finances even then, who'd quietly redirected the funds toward my half-brother Colton's MBA instead. It's just paperwork you're chasing, Nadia. Digital forensics isn't a real technical field the way engineering is. Colton's degree will actually run this company someday. I told Renata I'd come to the launch. I did not yet understand exactly what clean transition was actually going to mean. To understand why that phrase landed the way it did, you have to go back 10 years, to the year my father first promised me formal governance rights in the company he'd built. I just finished my forensics certification, entirely self-funded after Renata redirected my father's initial offer toward Colton's tuition instead, and my father, Watching me build an independent career he clearly respected more than he ever said aloud at family dinners, quietly began including me in Vantage Secure's informal strategic conversations, the kind that happen over weekend phone calls rather than board meetings. Someday, this needs someone who actually understands how systems can be manipulated running security oversight on the board, he told me once, 2 years before his death. Colton's brilliant with the business side. You understand the thing the business side can't see. I'm going to formalize that with real board authority once we're closer to going public. Renata's response, on the rare occasions she was present for these conversations, was consistent and dismissive. Julian, Nadia does data recovery for divorce lawyers. That's not governance experience. Colton spent 3 years learning to actually run this business. My father would go quiet in those moments, the particular quiet of a man who'd learned, over 2 decades of marriage, which battles were worth the resulting 3 days of cold silence from his wife. He died suddenly, a stroke, 11 months before the IPO launch date, before the formal trust amendment granting me board authority had been executed, though he'd told me, explicitly, on a phone call 4 months before his death, that he'd already instructed the company's outside counsel to draft it. "It's coming, Nadia," he'd said. "I want your name on this before we go public. I should have done it years ago instead of letting your stepmother talk me out of the timeline." Here's the part I don't say out loud very often. Despite everything, some quiet, stubborn part of me still measured my worth against those weekend phone calls with my father, the one place in my family where my actual expertise had always, quietly, been taken seriously. When Renata called about the launch, some old, familiar hope flared before the wariness did. The hope that this, finally, might be the moment the rest of my family understood what my father had already understood, before he ran out of time to make it official. My professional colleague and closest friend, Dara, has watched a decade of this exact pattern from close range, and she didn't hold back when I told her about the launch. "Nadia, your stepmother is asking you to publicly confirm a trust amendment you haven't independently verified. At the exact moment 300 investors are watching for signs of family stability. That's not an invitation to celebrate. That's a request for your credibility on the record." I told her she was right, and I went anyway, because some frightened, hopeful part of me still believed that if I showed up prepared, careful, genuinely useful, it might finally be the moment my family let my expertise matter for something, one last time, in honor of the one person who'd always actually valued it. I arrived at the NASDAQ market site tower in Times Square the morning of the launch expecting a modest company celebration, employees, a handful of early investors, perhaps a brief ceremonial bell ringing. What I found, walking in, was a fully staged media event. 300 institutional investors and analysts, a live financial news broadcast crew, and a projection wall displaying Vantage Secure's ticker symbol beside a countdown clock to market open. The physical contrasts hit before anyone said a word. Backstage, in a small staging area, sat my father's actual desk chair, brought from his old home office as a sentimental touch for photos, its cracked leather armrest still bearing the shape of his elbow from years of late-night debugging sessions. 20 feet away, on the main stage, a glossy new leadership slide displayed Colton's photo beneath the title Chief Executive Officer, professionally lit, clearly prepared weeks in advance of a launch that had originally, my father had promised me, been meant to include my name on the board slide beside it. The small comment started almost immediately, dressed in the particular warmth my family reserves for things they don't respect. My Aunt Diane squeezed my arm and said, "Isn't it exciting? You finally get to be part of something real instead of just your little computer investigations." One of Colton's new executive hires, admiring the stage setup, asked whether I'd ever considered doing actual tech work instead of just looking at old files for lawyers. "I've testified as an expert forensic witness in federal court a dozen times." I said nothing. Colton himself, reviewing his opening remarks near the stage entrance, called over his shoulder, "Don't turn today into one of your technical deep dives, Nadia. Just be present and supportive." I stepped into the small staging area alone, needing 10 minutes before the formal ceremony began, and pulled up the trust amendment document Renata's assistant had emailed me the previous evening, the one I was apparently expected to publicly affirm. Out of the same professional habit that governs every case I take on, I opened it in a forensic metadata viewer rather than simply reading the visible text, checking creation date, last modified timestamp, and the specific software signature embedded in the file. The document's visible date read 3 days before my father's death. The embedded metadata told a very different story. A creation timestamp 4 days after his death, generated using an e-signature platform version that, according to the vendor's own public release notes, hadn't been deployed until 6 weeks after that date. Stay with me, because what I found in the next 20 minutes changed the entire shape of that morning. I cross-referenced the document's digital certificate chain against the e-signature platform's audit trail, a public verification feature most people never think to check, and confirmed the signing session associated with my father's supposed electronic signature had originated from an IP address registered to Vantage Secure's own corporate office, logged in under an account that, per the platform's own records, belonged to the company's IT director, not my father. Renata found me there a few minutes later, checking the certificate chain against my laptop screen. Everything all right, honey? We start in 15 minutes. This trust amendment was created 4 days after Dad died, I said. Quiet, level, the metadata analysis still open on my screen. The signature session originated from the office IT director's account, not his. I need to understand what this actually is before I say anything on that stage. Renata's face did the thing it does when she's already decided how a conversation is going to end before it begins. Nadia, don't overcomplicate this. It's just paperwork, formalizing what your father already intended. This isn't the time for one of your technical audits. Second delivery, aimed directly at me now, standing feet from the desk chair that still held the shape of my father's arm. Colton appeared in the doorway, his voice tight. Nadia, seriously, we go live in 10 minutes. Just confirm the transition on stage like we discussed. It's just paperwork. The investors need to see us unified. Third delivery, in front of Renata, moments before I was scheduled to stand beside my half-brother in front of a live financial broadcast. I let the silence sit, 1 second, 3, 5 full seconds, while Colton's expression shifted from expectant to visibly uneasy, while Renata's hands tightened almost imperceptibly around her own phone. Then I said, quiet, level, I don't confirm documents I know are fraudulent. I never have. And I'm not starting with Dad's company on live television. The company's outside counsel, a composed woman named Priscilla Nkemalu, who'd worked with my father for over a decade, happened to be reviewing final launch paperwork nearby and caught the tail end of the exchange. Nadia, is there a concern with the trust documentation? There is, I said, turning my laptop toward her. The metadata shows this amendment was created 4 days after my father's death, signed under the IT director's account, not his. That's not a minor discrepancy. That's a forged instrument being presented as the basis for today's leadership structure, on the morning we're about to ring the opening bell. Priscilla's expression shifted from polite recognition to careful, professional alarm almost instantly. I need to see the full audit trail before this ceremony proceeds one more step. Renata tried a second time, softer now, uncertain. Priscilla, this is a family matter. We can review the paperwork after the launch. Document fraud isn't a family matter, Priscilla said, not unkindly. If this amendment is invalid, the leadership structure we're about to present to investors and the exchange this morning is materially misrepresented. That's a securities compliance issue, not a scheduling inconvenience. Colton's second attempt landed worse than the first. The IT team helped process it. That's normal for electronic signing. It means someone logged into that platform 4 days after your father died and signed his name to a document that changes control of this company, I said. I'd like the IT director brought in before anyone says another word on that stage. The IT director, a young man named Preston Aldis, who'd clearly been told very little about what this morning would actually involve, arrived within minutes, and his composure lasted exactly as long as it took Priscilla to ask him, directly, whether he'd processed an e-signature under Julian Kessler's name after his death. He did not answer. The silence that followed answered for him. I don't owe this launch my confirmation, I said finally, into the tense quiet gathering backstage. I never did. NASDAQ's compliance liaison, present for the ceremony as standard practice for any public listing, was informed within the hour, and the opening bell ceremony was formally postponed pending an internal review of the leadership transition documentation, a delay that made brief, careful mention in the financial press that same afternoon. I want to be honest that I didn't feel triumphant watching that unfold. What I felt, mostly, was tired and genuinely sad, understanding exactly how close my family had come to taking my father's life's work public on the strength of a forgery. The internal review, conducted independently by the board's outside counsel, confirmed within 2 weeks exactly what my forensic analysis had shown. Colton, facing both civil liability and the very real possibility of securities fraud exposure given the timing relative to the public offering, ultimately stepped back from the CEO role while the matter was resolved, and Preston Aldis, the IT director who'd processed the forged signature under Renata's direction, cooperated fully with the review in exchange for limited liability, confirming Renata had directed the amendment's creation in the days immediately following my father's death, before informing me or anyone else in the family what she'd asked him to do. I did not pursue every consequence legally available to me, though Dara reminded me, more than once, that I'd have had every right to. What I did instead was work with the board to properly execute the trust amendment my father had actually verbally committed to, restoring my rightful board seat with full security governance authority, the version of that document that should have existed all along, drafted honestly, months late, but finally real. The quieter thing happened 3 weeks later, going through my father's home office to help settle his estate, when I found, in a drawer beneath his old desk chair, a printed draft of the trust amendment he'd actually been working on before he died, unsigned but complete, dated the week before his stroke, alongside a short, handwritten note. Nadia, this is coming, I promise. You've spent your whole career proving things other people would rather not look at closely. This company needs exactly that on its board, permanently, and I should have made it official years before I finally did. I'm sorry it took me this long. I never once doubted you were ready. What I learned, standing backstage at a launch ceremony holding proof that my own family had forged my father's signature to seize control of his life's work, is that expertise dismissed as just paperwork for a decade doesn't disappear. It waits, quietly, in a metadata trail nobody expects anyone to actually check. For the exact moment someone needs the truth, it was always recording. A signature can be forged. The trail underneath it almost never can be. That's my story. If it meant something to you, drop a comment and tell me. I read every one. And if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe to her final chapter, because there's another one waiting for you next week. That's my story. If it meant something to you, drop a comment and tell me. I read every one. And if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe to her final chapter, because there's another one waiting for you next week.